Most people think successful people are just more disciplined. They're not. They just don't rely on how they feel to make progress. On bad days, motivation collapses. Energy is low. Focus is gone. So if progress still happens, it's not coming from willpower. And that's the part most people miss.
Bad days aren't an exception.
They're the default. Over a long enough timeline, most days feel slightly off. Tired, distracted, unclear. So if your system only works when you feel good, it's already broken. Which raises the real question. If two people wake up equally unmotivated, why does progress still happen for one of them? That's what this video is about. On bad days, something predictable happens inside the brain. Motivation collapses first. Not because you're weak, but because motivation is state-dependent. It's fueled by clarity, novelty, and emotional reward. And all three are usually missing when the day starts off wrong. Energy follows shortly after. Focus doesn't disappear all at once. It fragments. Attention jumps from thought to thought, looking for relief instead of direction. And that's the moment most people misdiagnose the problem. The default explanation becomes personal.
I'm off today. I just don't have it. Tomorrow will be better.
That interpretation feels harmless, even compassionate, but it quietly shifts progress onto something unstable. It ties movement to mood, and moods are volatile by design. They fluctuate with sleep, stress, social input, blood sugar, unresolved thoughts. Building a system that depends on them is like building a bridge on moving ground. This is why bad days matter so much more than good ones. Good days are easy. On good days, almost any strategy works. You feel capable, alert, optimistic. You can push, you can improvise, you can recover from mistakes. But those days don't define outcomes over years. They just create spikes. The real trajectory is shaped on days when nothing feels aligned and the internal resistance is high. Here's the subtle reframe. If progress still happens on those days, it cannot be the result of effort in the moment. Effort requires fuel. Bad days don't provide it. So whatever is creating forward motion must exist outside of the emotional state of that day. It must be something already in place, already decided, already structured. So if progress still happens on bad days, it can't be accidental. It has to be designed. Pillar 1. Default actions. Successful people don't decide what to do on bad days. The decision was already made. That idea sounds simple, almost obvious, but it explains something most people quietly struggle with. On low-energy days, the real drain isn't the work itself. It's the moment before the work, when the brain is asked to choose. That moment is where progress usually dies. Not loudly, not dramatically. It just slips away while the mind weighs options it doesn't have the energy to resolve. Here's what's rarely noticed. Decision-making pulls from the same limited cognitive reserve that bad days already deplete. Focus is unstable, emotional noise is high, and yet most systems still ask the brain to evaluate, prioritize, and commit. That mismatch creates friction, and friction, when energy is low, feels like resistance. So the mind does what it's designed to do. It delays. It renegotiates. It searches for an easier entry point that never really arrives. This is why internal debates feel so convincing on bad days.
I'll start later. I need to think this through.
Maybe there's a better use of time right now. None of those thoughts are lies, but they all serve the same function. They postpone action until conditions improve, and the subtle cost is that the system becomes dependent on a future emotional state that may or may not show up. Default actions change that dynamic entirely. When the work is already selected, when the starting point is fixed, when the next step is obvious before the day even begins, the brain doesn't have to generate clarity. It just follows a pre-existing track. Action doesn't feel bold or disciplined. It feels almost incidental. And that's the point. Progress begins before motivation gets a chance to vote. This is where the usual definition of discipline starts to fall apart. Amounting to what looks like self-control from the outside is often just a lack of choice on the inside. The fewer decisions required in the moment, the less energy is needed to move. Resistance doesn't have to be fought if it never fully forms. The system quietly does the work that willpower was never meant to handle. But this raises an uncomfortable question. If default actions are so powerful, why don't they feel productive in the way people expect? Why does progress on bad days often look almost insignificant, even pointless in the moment? That tension is not accidental. It's the doorway to the second pillar. Pillar 2. Low-stakes progress. On bad days, progress looks wrong. It feels too small to matter, too unimpressive to count, almost embarrassing when compared to what you think you should be capable of.
And that's exactly why most people abandon it.
They're not resisting effort, they're resisting insignificance. The mind wants actions that justify the discomfort of starting, something that feels worthy of the energy it's about to spend. Here's the quiet truth. Progress that survives bad days is intentionally underwhelming. It doesn't try to win the day. It tries to keep the line unbroken. On low-energy days, the system lowers the cost of participation so far that the brain can't find a reason to object. There's no performance standard to meet, no outcome to chase, no internal pressure to prove anything. Movement becomes possible because expectations have been engineered down to almost nothing. This is where the myth of the productive day quietly loses its grip. High output feels satisfying, but it's volatile. It depends on alignment, clarity, and emotional momentum. Low-stakes progress depends on none of that. It's designed to function in noise, fatigue, and distraction. It doesn't care how the day feels. It only cares that the system remains intact. This is where most people quit. Not because it's hard, but because it feels pointless. There's a psychological shift that happens here, and it's subtle. When progress is small enough, it stops triggering self-judgment. There's nothing to evaluate, nothing to compare, nothing to optimize. The action happens, and then it's done. The brain registers continuity instead of success or failure. Over time, that continuity begins to carry more weight than any single productive spike ever could. What makes this counterintuitive is that low-stakes progress often feels invisible while it's happening. It doesn't create a sense of achievement. It doesn't produce immediate confidence. But it does something far more important. It reinforces identity without requiring intensity. The system keeps moving even when the person feels off, and that repetition quietly rewires expectations about what bad days are capable of. And this is where the tension deepens. If progress can be this small and still matter, then something else must be doing the heavy lifting. Something outside effort, outside motivation, outside even the actions themselves. Which brings everything to the final pillar, where the real leverage actually lives. Pillar 3. Environment over mood. When energy is high, mood feels like the driver. You feel focused, so you work. You feel clear, so you decide. But on bad days, that illusion collapses. Mood becomes unstable, unreliable, almost irrelevant. And yet something still determines what happens next. Not motivation, not discipline. The environment quietly takes over. This is the part most people underestimate. When internal energy drops, external signals grow louder. The brain becomes more reactive, more sensitive to cues, more likely to follow whatever is easiest to access. The closest object, the most visible option, the lowest friction behavior starts to pull attention without asking permission. In that state, environment doesn't just influence action, it decides it. That's why bad days feel slippery. Focus doesn't fail because you don't care. It fails because the surrounding architecture is designed for comfort, not continuation. Screens are closer than tools. Distractions are smoother than work. Relief is one tap away, while progress requires multiple steps. When the brain is tired, it doesn't choose what's meaningful. It chooses what's frictionless. People often interpret this as a personal flaw, a lack of control, a weakness in character. But what's really happening is mechanical. The system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. On low energy, it follows the path with the least resistance. And if that path leads away from progress, no amount of internal resolve will consistently override it. This is where leverage quietly shifts. When the environment is structured so that work is the easiest available option, action happens almost by default. Not because the day feels good, but because alternatives feel heavier. The brain doesn't need to be convinced.
It just responds to what's in front of it.
Tools in sight, distractions at a distance, fewer steps between intention and action than between impulse and escape. What's powerful about this is that it works precisely when motivation doesn't. The worse the day feels, the more dominant the environment becomes, which means that on bad days, mood matters less than layout, placement, and friction. The system keeps moving not because you're pushing it forward, but because nothing around you is pulling you away as strongly. And once you notice this, something clicks. Progress on bad days isn't heroic. It's not an act of will. It's a consequence of design. The environment is doing the regulating that mood never could. Which leads directly into the deeper truth behind all three pillars. The one idea that ties everything together and explains why some systems survive bad days while others quietly collapse. Bad days don't stop progress. Systems that depend on feeling good do. It separates outcomes from emotions. It redraws the boundary between what is happening inside a person and what is actually producing results over time. And once that separation becomes clear, a lot of self-judgment starts to lose its grip. Most people unconsciously believe progress is a reflection of how aligned they feel. When things move forward, they assume something is working internally. When things stall, they assume something is wrong with them. That interpretation turns every low-energy day into a personal verdict. Am I disciplined enough? Am I focused enough? Am I falling behind? The problem isn't the question itself. It's that the system is built to answer it every single day. But systems don't need emotional permission to operate. They don't require confidence. They don't wait for clarity. They execute based on structure. When progress is tied to how someone feels, every fluctuation becomes a threat. When progress is tied to design, fluctuation becomes irrelevant. The day can feel heavy, scattered, or dull, and the system still moves because it was never listening to the mood in the first place. This is where the meaning of a bad day quietly changes. It stops being a signal to pause or reset and starts being just another condition the system was built to handle. Not an obstacle, not a failure, just a lower energy context. And in that context, the system doesn't aim for excellence. It aims for survival. Continuity over intensity, stability over output. There's something relieving about this shift. It removes the pressure to feel a certain way in order to be allowed to move forward. Progress no longer becomes a reward for feeling good. It becomes a baseline behavior that happens regardless. And when that happens consistently, identity begins to shift. You stop seeing yourself as someone who works when conditions are right, and start seeing yourself as someone whose systems function under imperfect conditions. If progress only works on good days, it's not a system. It's a mood.